All right, this is one of the most versatile doughs I know. It's good for technically what you could call a same day dough. It is an indirect dough, so there's a step that comes the day before, and that step is making the pre-ferment or the Biga. I like to do it overnight, and that's kind of the recipe I'll be giving you. I'll start with a yeasted because that's what most people probably will do. It's just going to be 2,000 grams of strong white flour, 1,000 grams of water, room temperature, and then what would be 0.1% compressed or fresh yeast, which that would be 2 grams of fresh yeast, basically 1 gram per kilo, and then the conversions for active dry and instant dry yeast. As above, active dry is twice as strong as fresh yeast, and instant dry yeast is 3 times as strong as fresh yeast. So it's pretty easy to make the conversions there. Also in the flour, if you want to sub out some of the strong white flour for whole wheat and or rye or any other preferred grain that you want to use, that will add some flavor as well. Just as when I do it sourdough, my sourdough starter has whole wheat and rye, so there will be some of those flavors in the sourdough Biga Levain. It might look confusing right after that because it looks like some algebra almost, which it kind of is. If I want to make my 3,000 grams of Biga, I'll have to follow a certain ratio to actually get 50% hydration in the amount that I want. And to find out the water that you want, you would do 2F minus 1 all over 4 will get you how much water you need for a recipe. So for instance, I'll just use the one that I use, which is 1 to 3 to 1.25. 2 times the flour would be 6, minus 1 is 5, over 4 is 1.25, so the ratio would be 1 to 3 to 1.25. I now have my 571 grams of a controlled or refrigerator CT temp active starter. Basically, it doubled before it went in the fridge for a few days or up to a week, and I'll use that to build my Biga. I'll use 3 times that amount in strong white bread flour, and I will use 1.25 that amount in room temperature water, and then I'll go to bed. I'll give it about 8 hours, but it can go up to about 12 before I go and I make the Biga, and let's get into that. Alright guys, I got a pizza gig tomorrow afternoon, aka Tuesday afternoon, and it's Monday night. It's late, it's coming up on midnight, but that's perfect timing to make the Biga. I have this starter that's nice and active. That's been going since Thursday of last week. I'll show you what I do because I also have to have this ready for Thursday to make bread. So you'll see a little bit of starter maintenance and everything. So essentially, I'm making a leaven or a pre-ferment. So you could do this without sourdough. It's just going to be a Biga, so it's going to be 50% hydration, meaning half the weight in flour will be water. And in percent of your flour, you want what would be 1% fresh yeast. So if you're using fresh yeast, that's great. If you're using active dry yeast, it would be 0.5%, and if you're using instant dry yeast, it would be 0.3%. And you're basically going to go overnight. I like the 12-hour Biga. Some people do 16 or more, but I also live in Florida where it's a little warmer. So first thing I'm going to do is get my starter. And I'm basically going to feed my starter 1 to 3 to 1.25. And that'll get me 50% hydration with the amount that I need. I use an Excel spreadsheet to do the math. Alright, so the math depending on who you are, it could be a little complicated. Feel free to skip this part. I'm going to kind of rough over it real fast. But let's say you need 1,000 grams of a sourdough Biga Levain with the ratio of 1 to 3 to 1.25, and that's always starter flour water for anybody who doesn't know. To find the gram measurements of each ingredient, you can use this equation. X will be your starter amount, which you can then use your ratio to find the rest, or you can look at it the way I did here. I look at each part of the ratio as an expression of X to make this equation. X plus 3X plus 1.25X equals 1,000. Summed up, 5.25X equals 1,000. Summed up, X equals 190.5. And then I check my work. It came out to 1,000. You want to do that so you don't mess anything up. So my starter amount will be 190.5 grams. My flour amount will be 571.5 grams. And my water will be 238 grams. That's if I needed 1,000 grams of sourdough Biga Levain. This can be plugged into Excel. That's what I do. It tells me how much I need. Whether I change the ratio, it automatically plugs in this way. So very helpful to get good with Excel. This is the math behind it. I hope that clears things up. If it makes it more difficult, don't worry. The rest of the video will be able to explain what's going on. Which I'll probably do a video on that soon too. Got the perfect amount here. And so this little bit is what I'm gonna feed to make to replenish my starter. Put that aside. And for my water, I need 714 grams. Oh, a little too much there. That's good. And then before I add my flour, I'm gonna mix my starter into the water. You can skip this step essentially, but when you're making a Biga, you really want everything dispersed. So I personally like to mix my starter in. It helps just kind of mix everything together. And it's hard to get it perfect when your starter's got, like, you know, some strength to it. It won't really allow much more water in, but just kind of making it so you're getting the surface area of your container. You don't need to fully blend it, but the better you do, the more even your fermentation will be within your pre-ferment or leaven. So in a sense, you could call this a stiff leaven. But I do just call it a sourdough Biga just because I'm pretty much following a Biga to a T, just using sourdough. So now for this I need 1,700 grams of flour. I'm doing enough for 5 kilograms of flour total. That's good. So using a spoon or a fork is a good way to kind of, you know, get everything together to start. What you don't want to do is really make too much of a dough. It's okay if you do incorporate everything, but you don't want to like keep on kneading it and form gluten. You're basically putting like just enough water that can somewhat hydrate the flour. Basically the minimum amount of water, which comes out to, I mean, you could even do less than 50%. You could do like 45%. Traditional Biga is actually 44 to 45%. But keep in mind that was back when flours didn't have the same kind of protein content they have now. So they didn't absorb water as well. So to make change for that, using a stronger flour, you would probably go up to around 50%. So now I got something that looks like this. There's still a bunch of dry flour. I get my hands dirty and I just go in, I kind of pick it up, drop it down. But yeah, this dough recipe, essentially it's just as much refreshment flour as Biga. So when I go to make the dough, this is going to be 3 kilos of Biga, and I'm going to give it 3 kilos of flour, refreshment flour as well. So my idea for this dough, I'm not the first person to do this kind of amount, but if you're feeding a starter, you would never feed it less flour than the amount of starter you have. So I want there to be as much flour as leaven while not being a crazy amount like 100% Biga. And this is a super versatile dough. The way I'm using it today is I'm going to make this Biga. It's going to sit on the counter overnight basically, and then in the morning I'm going to make dough, and that dough should be perfectly ready for dinner time. So then, once I get to a step like this, where there's not really a whole bunch of loose, dry flour, I won't knead it, but I will kind of incorporate it. Just to kind of make it one mass. My reasoning to do this is because sometimes when you don't, you get fragments of it that are wetter and some that are drier, and you get some like dry flour. Like right here I got a whole layer of dry flour on the outside. This kind of helps eliminate that. If you have a mixer that can handle, 3 kilograms of dough, go ahead and throw it in there. That's if you're doing this much. If you're doing home use, any KitchenAid or anything will be fine. I mix it just so it's incorporated and do exactly what I'm doing here. And this is pretty much exactly what I want. Just a little more so I can, there we go, just so I can see how much dry flour there is or not. This is enough for 30 pizzas. It's pretty much my minimum as far as the catering goes. Anything under that, it's not really worth setting up for unless people want to pay a lot of money for, 10 pizzas. But I think a lot of times they're probably better off going out somewhere. And I'm very happy with this Biga. So I'm just going to cover it. And I'm going to put this scale right on top of it, just to somewhat weigh down the lid, just for less chance of it drying out. And this is going to stay here till the morning, and then I'm going to make the dough. So I got the Biga over here, ready to just sit overnight till I make the dough, kind of get that pre-fermentation going. And over here, I'm going to feed the starter, which once again is what's called the scrapings method, just leaving the scrapings. You can either feed it directly from this jar, but I'm actually going to go into this new jar here because I need a lot more when it comes to the bread. I need about 2 kilograms of starter to make all the leavens I need. And one thing that's been helping me out is if I just feed the starter ahead of time, like now, I don't need to come in, I don't need to worry about feeding the starter Thursday night. Just Friday morning I can make my Levains. So first thing I'm gonna do, wet my thing, and I don't need that much, but I'm gonna try to get everything. Literally, I'm gonna scrape out the scrapings here. And I did forget to scale that, but that's okay. It's probably no more than 50 grams total is what I left in here. I also do this so I can kind of regularly change my container. And I'm gonna do 1 kilo of water. And again, I'm gonna mix up the starter into it just a little more. And now I got my starter mix, which is basically half high-gluten flour, 2/3 high-gluten flour, 1/3 whole wheat, and a splash of rye. Go. Take this off the scale. I try not to mix on scales unless it's something like this, which is super high capacity. Just so my force I put down on the scale doesn't destroy it. And what I'm using is called a Danish dough whisk. You can find them pretty easily on Amazon. They're super useful. For your starter, or if you're doing a liquid leaven, you basically just want to feed to 100% hydration and just until you don't see any dry flour. Part of the reason I'm doing this too, to where I'm feeding the starter ahead of time, is because a lot of people have been asking for more sourdough or sour bread. And usually I try to make it just have more of a, unique but bready taste. But a lot of my customers, they want tang, so this is one of those things I can do to kind of make them happy. And what I'm gonna do, I use these expos all the time. I'm just marking where it is. So then in the morning, I'll see where it rose to. And that's pretty much it. So come back tomorrow for mix day and we'll go from there. So here's a nice way to summarize the entire dough recipe and make it kind of make sense. If you look at everything in bold, it's 100% of total flour, 70% total water, 3% salt, 1% extra virgin olive oil. So let's start with the flour. 40% of it is going to be what's going into the Biga. So 40% of the total flour is pre-fermented, which makes this a 40% Biga dough. And 60% is going to be refreshment flour, which is what's added to the pre-ferment to give it something to eat and kind of a fresh yeast source to finish the fermentation. And I write weak to strong because if you're doing like a dough that you need within 3 or 4 hours, use an all-purpose 0-0 flour. If it's like 8 hours, maybe 4 to 8 hours, maybe a bread flour, or 1 day in the fridge would be good for a bread flour. And then a high-gluten flour can give you 72 hours in the fridge, or maybe even up to 12 hours room temperature. Of the total water, 20% is pre-fermented water. It's just good to know that in the recipe. 40% will be refreshment water A. A stands for Autolyse, and it's used first. Basically, that's what's going to go in with, the refreshment flour and the refreshment water A. 10% is the refreshment water B for the bassinage, which basically means a bath in French. All the water will be cold that's added. The 10% water B will be added with the salt, and then the extra virgin olive oil will be added throughout the process of making dough. You can add it in the mixer, but sometimes you need more to rub on your hands when you ball the dough and stuff like that. And I like to use an actual amount of olive oil for those processes. So it comes out to about 1%. All right, so here's the steps in making the dough. First, in the bowl, you're going to put all of the Biga, the 3,000 grams of refreshment flour, the 2,000 grams of cold water A for the Autolyse, any additional yeast if applicable. So if you're doing this yeasted and you start to get somewhat of a sour smell or taste in your Biga, then I would add about 0.1% of the refreshment flour and fresh yeast. You now know the conversions at this point, and it will kind of wake the Biga back up and walk out of the alcoholic fermentation and walk back into the carbon dioxide fermentation. You can omit the yeast here, but if your Biga is over fermented, that acid may transfer into the dough. And you're going to let it rest or fermentolyse for 15 to 30 minutes before moving on. The next step will be to add the salt and the cold water B for bassinage. You're going to mix on slow speed for 2.5 to 7.5 minutes. I did 5 minutes, and that was enough time for the water to stop pooling, meaning you didn't have visible loose water that could splash all over the place before moving to the next step where you increase the speed to a high, medium speed, or speed 2 for 5 to 10 minutes or until very close to achieving a window pane. A window pane is a test of gluten development where you grab about a baseball size of dough, stretch it to the point you can see light through it, and you want to get to where it just breaks right before that moment because you're going to build some more strength right after it comes out of the bowl by doing some basically somewhat aggressive coil folds or slap and folds if you have a small enough quantity, just to make it into a nice little ball. Rest it for an hour. You're going to laminate the dough, throw it in the fridge for an hour. While it's nice and cold, you're going to divide and round the dough, and then you can rest 2 minutes room temperature or up to 72 hours in the fridge. It's super versatile. Let's get into it. Now this chart is more so if you are in the restaurant and you have like Biga on hand. So if you're going to grab Biga and say I'm going to make a dough with this amount of Biga, this is how you would go about it. So I would grab my 3,000 grams of Biga, or 100%, match that weight in flour, do 2/3 of that weight for my water A. You're going to add that extra yeast, which once again will be like 0.1% of your refreshment flour and fresh yeast. You're going to mix until it's incorporated and fermentolyse for 15 to 30 minutes before adding your salt and your water B. Your salt will be 5% of your refreshment flour, and your water B will be 16.7% of your refreshment flour. You're going to mix until no more water is pooling, so 2.5 to 7.5 minutes speed 1, followed by 5 to 10 minutes speed 2, until you almost reach that window pane. Alright guys, it's the next morning. The starter only rose maybe 10%, and that's okay considering it was a brand new clean jar. That has a lot to do with it. And I fed it like 1 to 20 to 20, which means that's like 5%. If I made a dough with 5%, it'd be anywhere from a 12 to 24 hour dough. So I can't expect a starter to be an 8-hour starter at that rate. So once this gets a 75 to 100% rise, which will be, you know, sometime by the afternoon, I'll throw it back in the fridge until Thursday and basically repeat the process, but for bread. Anyway, the Biga was fed like a 1 to 3 to 3, and as you can see, it's got plenty of fermentation. Sometimes what I also do is just cut into it, open it up, and look at it. And you can clearly see fermentation there. So this is going to be the first thing that goes into the bowl. Sometimes I just try to loosen it off the sides a little bit. This works in like a dough box too. You want to really get under it, and then should be able to get it all off just like that. Boom. Oh, got some more. And I like that I see no dry flour here. You want to kind of cut it up into little chunks about the size of a fist. And that's for this amount of dough, so if you're making less, you do want it to be not less as big, if that makes sense, or smaller. So for 5 kilograms of dough, it's probably what would be a 500 gram dough ball. So, or less, you know. I'm just gonna throw that in the mixer first. And out of the total flour, this is 60% Biga. So in the Biga, it's essentially 2 kilograms of flour and 1 liter of water. So I'm going to start out by doing a fermentolyse, which I got 2 kilos of water, 2 liters. I'm going to throw that in there. And then for my refreshment flour, it's the middle of summer, so I'm still going to use high-gluten flour. But I'm going to throw this in here. This is 60% of the total flour is for this refreshment. And I'm just going to mix that on speed 1 for about 7.5 minutes. You probably only need about 5 if you're using a stand mixer. Trying to get a good view on this for you. Also Also, I'm using cold water, very important. So now for my salt, I got 3% of the total salt, 150 grams for 5 kilos. I'm gonna dump it all in there. And then my water B, I got 500 milligrams, which is about 10% of the total flour. I'm just gonna pour it all in there as well. And I'll mix for 5 minutes on speed 1. Before I really go for that full 5 minutes, I do want to somewhat clean this bowl. It's always good to have a bowl scraper and some water on the side anytime you're mixing. Alright, now I'll go speed 1, 5 minutes. So now there's a lot less of that water pooled up, and the dough is going to start coming back together. doing 5 minutes on speed 2, and then I'm gonna check kind of a window pane, see where I'm at. All right, that's some pretty dough right there. I did forget to check the temp, but it shouldn't be too different right now. 26.6 Celsius, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Got right to the cusp. I like it around anywhere from 77 to 81 or 82. I might have been a little above that, and that's all right. I also have 1% olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, and I don't really throw it in the mixer. I kind of use this as my budget for the rest of the process. For instance, when I'm balling, I like to oil my hands. I do want to kind of oil this this bus tub here. I'm gonna put the dough in. I'm just gonna use this little brush and just kind of go for it. Alright, so I got this guy with the water. I'm going to dip my hands in. I'm going to grab it. You see how elastic that is. Break it there. Break it there, dip my hands again. And this is a sign of a properly mixed dough. Notice how there's not a bunch of dough underneath it. Super elastic. After you mix, you want to take your dough. If you have only a little bit, you can actually do some slap and folds on the table. But since I actually have a decent bit of dough, I'm gonna wet my hands. I'm gonna get under it and basically kind of aggressively coil fold. I wanna make it so what was the dough on top, even in the mixer, is the dough on top now. There's always the mesh of gluten inside of the dough, and kind of the shield or shell of gluten on the outside. And I'm going to take some more of that oil and just kind of go all along the outside. And a little bit. The oil is optional. I'm not doing traditional Neapolitan. I'm doing kind of contemporary, so I like a little bit of oil. But yeah, so now I got that ready. I'm gonna give it 1 hour, and then I'm gonna laminate the dough. So let me cover this up. Always pop something on it just to make sure you got the right weight. Alright, so it's been an hour since I mixed the dough. First thing I'm going to do, I got the same water I have. I just kind of get my hand in it and rub it all around. I want the whole table, because I am going to use the entire table. Do want to make sure your table's clean for this. Yeah, so you shouldn't be using much more than like 100 milliliters of water throughout this part. So now I'm going to take my dough, get my hands in the water just to be safe. And I do want to actually take it out. I don't want to flip it out. Put that aside. And so I got it in the center of my table. I'm laminating, so I want to make this very thin. This is kind of like a step up from a stretch and fold or a coil fold. It builds a lot more strength. Somebody taught me long ago that gluten is like a rubber band. So that's the best way I have to look at it. So you're gonna fold this like 2/3 over. Fold the other side over that. And then you can kind of coil fold the rest of it. And you can build some tension, just like this. Now I got a nice hunk of dough. Boom, back in there. A little more of that olive oil. And now since these doughs can, if you do it this way, you can get, very high hydrations. You can get 90, 80. 90 is going to be very difficult, but 80 is very manageable. Next thing you're going to want to do is refrigerate this for about an hour before you roll it. And it makes it easier to roll when it's colder. It's a little sticky, a little more manageable. It feels like a lower hydration. If you're short on time, you should probably use a weaker flour, like all-purpose or bread flour. But you don't have to refrigerate it. I do it because it makes it easier to roll. And I know I have enough time until the actual event. So here's the dough. It's got some bubbles on it. Feels real nice. It's time to ball it up. Once again, I want to free the dough from the sides and bottom of the bus tub. And this should be right around 30 doughs for 5 kilograms. It's around 6 doughs per kilogram. Or right around 10 pies per liter. So this is 3 liters plus some, about 3,500, and I do get like 1 extra dough. The rule on the water more applies to lower hydrations. This is about 70 hydration, so it won't apply exactly like that. But here, first thing I do is cut off a nice little strip of the dough, like that. And I'm going for about anywhere from 280 to 300. So what I'll do, I love these bigger scales because you can do what I'm doing right here. There we go. And since the dough isn't extremely warm, it's really nice to roll. See, no oil on my hands, just like that. And before I put them on the dough boxes, I actually like to put them on a table. It just kind of helps make sure your bottom stays closed because it can't spread out if it's on the table. For instance, I also want to make sure my hands are oiled if need be, because as this goes on, you will need some oil. Another reason the table helps, because as soon as you get oil on the dough, it's more likely to want to open back up. I do try to roll it pretty tight. And I am kind of just tucking it in and closing it. And then once I get something like that, I just tuck it into my middle finger with my thumb. And that should kind of close it pretty well. Bada bing, bada boom. And the reason I do it like this is just so you don't use more oil than you should, basically. Pretty much going perfect here. I'm gonna
dough still got its 1% oil without overdoing too much. Now as you do the rest of my hands, just kind of boop, boop. Once again, you also can skip oil. Your hands will probably get a little more wet. Don't really recommend using water too much when balling dough. Now you got your crust nice and oiled up. Very helpful. Next thing I'm going to do, not quite enough for pizza, that's okay. A lot of times I'll save it and have a pizza later on. Get this out of the way. Yes. Grab some dough trays.
I always do 15 a tray, and to me, the easiest method is to do it like this, because you want to make sure that they're all nice and even. So you get your outer layer, something. And again, for me, it's a Florida summer. It's probably gonna feel like 100 degrees, so I wanted to make sure I used a strong flour. I actually want to get this in the fridge again, because I'm also driving a car that the AC is not working right now. So in that hot box of a car, I'd rather get to room temperature than be room temperature and blow up before my event. So at this amount, if you have a fridge, which most people do, this is a great one. It's good for, you could do 72 hours and then, you know, let it come to room temperature. You could do same day like I'm doing now. You could do 1 day, 2 days. If you're in a bit of a colder environment, I would probably do a refreshment of all-purpose if it's really cold where you're at. Bread flour if it's more like in the 60s maybe. And high-gluten if you're 75 or above. Like I said, it's gonna feel like 100 degrees, so I need a strong flour that's not gonna turn this into acid. But yeah, I'm gonna throw this in the fridge for about 2 to 3 hours just to kind of cool it down completely, and then it's gonna come with me for the ride. I'm gonna set up and get ready for the event. So that's it. Contemporary Neapolitan pizza dough.